My name's Dale Long. I was born in Tuskegee, Alabama. As an infant, we moved to Birmingham. We stayed with my grandmother and my Aunt Ruth, and my parents finally bought a home in about 1955. I was born in 52. As far back as I remember, we went to 16th Street Baptist Church every Sunday without failure. My mother and my aunt grew up in that church. My grandmother was there, of course, and my maternal grandfather was assistant pastor there for a while. He was filling in when they were in between pastors. So 16th Street Church is a part of my life. 16th Street was something going on all the time there. Wholesome activities for kids that we couldn't get anywhere else. Black history, for example, American history that we didn't learn in school. We practiced music. I think I became a pretty good musician because I played 7 days a week because of the church. I was playing at school, and then Saturday and Sunday I was rehearsing, and then I did a lot on my own. So it was always something for us to do that made sense, that enhanced our educational experience with the study of the Bible and vacation Bible school, Sunday school, and all of that. But there was other stuff going on too that didn't happen at the public schools. Birmingham growing up was tough. Separate water fountains. In Plessy versus Ferguson, it says separate but equal, but nothing was equal in Birmingham. The colored water fountain was in the corner, never got cleaned, and was not chilled water, while the white water fountain was right next to it, chilled water, spick and span clean, and I realized something was wrong with that. I couldn't help but ask my parents questions about, well, what's wrong with black people? Why is it that we're treated differently? When we went shopping for shoes, before we left home, my mom would place our feet on a piece of paper and trace it and present that to the attendant at the store because we couldn't try on shoes. We couldn't place our feet in the measuring device. We couldn't try on shoes when I'm looking at a little white girl, a little white boy right next to me trying on shoes. Well, wait a minute, Mom. Why can't I do it? Shh. I was inquisitive and I needed to know. On one hand, my parents told me if I apply myself and study hard, I can be anything I wanted to be. But what's up with what we're experiencing right now? There were no white kids at my school, Bernetta C. Hill School. All of the furniture that we received at Hill School was hand-me-down from white schools. When the white kids who owned the furniture prior to that knew where the old furniture was going, when they got new furniture, they wrote us messages. You can well imagine that they weren't too pleasant. That was just a way of life then. I never peered into a new microscope or used a new Bunsen burner or a new test tube, or none of that. Everything we got was used by somebody else, another school. I didn't play football, but I used to hear stories about when the football team got new helmets, they were blue. School colors was purple, but they had to spray paint it because the blue helmets came from a white school. But Birmingham was tough. We would hear about the bombings all the time. I would hear my parents talk in secret about the danger of being a member of the NAACP. I've been a member for the last 30 years and I don't worry about it. Anything they ask me to do, I go do. But back then it was a risk involved in having your name on a list like that. The kids at school told me about going to the Lyric Theater, what's the other one? The Lyric and Melba, yes, to see the Shaggy Dog. And I would go to the Carver Theater every now and then, or the 8th Avenue Theater that wasn't too far from my house. But I never went to the white theaters because the black folks had to sit in the balcony and they called it the crow's nest. Now, all the kids at school was talking about this Disney film where this little boy changed himself into a dog. And we begged our parents to take us to see it. And every time we would ask, they would change the subject. And we kept on and on and on. Finally, my mom and dad got together and decided to go. My dad took us. We pulled in front of the Melba Theater, I thought it was, and we jumped out and I was so excited. And we ran to window there, and my dad said, "Come here, son." I said, "Dad, you don't understand, we have to pay here. I seen people do it on TV." He said, "Come here, Dad, come here." And he took us around the side through an alley, and we went to a window and ended up talking to a lady that we could not see, so dark. And she immediately said, "I don't have change, boy," talking to my dad, not us. "You got to go get change from somewhere." He didn't get angry. He just politely took his $20 bill back, and we got in the car, and he went down to the AG Gas, the motel, got the change, and came back. Of course, that parking spot was gone right out front, but we went to that same window, paid our fare, and then it began. As we started to walk up the stairs to the crow's nest, our feet stuck to the floor. The carpet was so filthy or worn, and we would trip as we attempted to walk up the stairs. No lights where we could see. And I remember when we thought we found 3 seats together, my brother sat down and went clean to the floor. And I knew then. That's why my parents didn't want us to experience it, and I could see the humiliation on my dad's face, even in the darkness. So he didn't have to explain anymore. We knew right away there was something wrong with that. I'm not sure we enjoyed that film too much, and I don't even remember even sharing my experience with my classmates the next day at school because I felt bad about it. And if I talked about something at school, I wanted it to be good stuff. Now, to some people, that was okay, because people claimed that he used to throw stuff down on white people. They probably did. And to them, that was fun. To me, I figured you get put in jail or assaulted or beat up or something for doing that. So we never did that again until right after the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And we went to see a James Bond movie at the Alabama Theater. And my parents, my mom had us to sit at the very back, and we were not to go to the bathroom, and we were not to buy anything, just sit there and watch the film. She knew when it was over, come back and get us. I went, my brother went, and a friend, James Lowe. The 3 of us went. And we didn't do exactly what they said. We sat in the one row up from the back, and a man ended up sitting behind us, kept whispering stuff while we were sitting there. He dared either one of us to go to the bathroom, because this was shortly after the Civil Rights Bill was passed, and maybe a month. And that was challenging and frightening to us, but nothing happened. And I don't even think we told our folks about it. So it was a tough time growing up in Birmingham. I remember going to the art museum when I was 8, 9 years old and a member of the church, and the only time black folk could go, or at least black kids could go, was after hours when they slip us in. I thought we were getting a special showing, privileged, but I didn't realize until years later that the people were slipping us in because we couldn't get caught being there during the daytime. So it was usually 8:30 and 9 before we even began the tour. But anyway, we were able to receive the same thing everybody else did. It was just a rush job, and people were concerned that we get caught. We had very hardworking, smart, well-educated teachers that took us beyond what I just described to you and made sure that we were well prepared to move on to the next level if that's what we desired to do. And I was very proud of that. My mom was a school teacher. My best friend, my Aunt Ruth, at one point was the only black typing teacher in the whole state. Black folks would send their kids to Parker High School during the summer to take typing from her, because she was known throughout the area. And I admired that about her, because she worked hard, and they put a good work ethic in me that I still practice even though I'm retired. My parents invested in me. not just music, I mean, not just the science fair stuff, but music as well. Because that was very prominent in my community. People like music. 16th Street Church had a church orchestra. I wanted to learn to play saxophone because I thought it was just a beautiful sounding instrument. My dad worked at A.G. Gaston Motel, and in the supper club, they would have top name musicians to come through there, and he used to slip me in. I'd sit in the back and listen to Eddie Harris and Ramsey Lewis and Young Holt Unlimited, and I know I was doing something my peers didn't get a chance to do, but my point is I was exposed to that level of expert jazz, and I wanted to do the same thing. I continued to play in the church orchestra. I eventually connected with guys my age. We created a rhythm and blues band. First it was just fun, and then it became something that we got called upon to play for gigs, and we were making money. We were competing with adult bands. We were just that good. We worked hard at it because we loved what we were doing, and we knew what we needed to do. Some of the guys in the band, their dads were professional musicians. Jimmy Lowe, James Lowe, and Carl Chappelle, their dads played. No such thing in my house, but I worked hard, I practiced hard, and did pretty good academically. Wasn't a straight A student. I think I was dyslexic. I didn't like math. Anything else was fine. English, history, government, I loved, but I just struggled with math. And that was kind of tough on me because a lot of the electronics is math, physics, and that stuff, but I got out of it some sort of way. But I ended up learning to play clarinet first. And one Christmas, I think I was in the 7th grade, my folks, Santa Claus, brought me an alto sax, and instead of me playing outside with my friends for the few days left before we went back to school, I went downtown, bought a tune-a-day book for a saxophone, and I sat there and taught myself to play. So when I went back to elementary school, I was killing it. I was really playing. I even hoped to see Mr. Cantelo, my 4th grade music teacher that taught me to play clarinet, at church tomorrow. And I just looked so forward to visiting with him because that clarinet took me to college. I went on a scholarship, and so he's important to me and precious to me. But my point is, teachers worked hard. My parents worked hard. The village worked hard. The people of 16th Street Baptist Church worked hard despite the things that we encountered. The Armstrong brothers who live behind me, their backyard and my backyard was separated by an alley. And when the decision was made for them to integrate Graymont Elementary School, the FBI sat in between the two houses night and day to protect the Armstrong brothers. But in essence, they protected us also because they were right in the backyard. They had a meeting with my folks and explained to them that they needed to keep an eye out on us because we were the same size, same age, same color as Dwight and Floyd Armstrong. What is the Klan? Because the kids at school were telling me stuff, and Al and Derek was telling me stuff too, because their home had been bombed the same night at the A.G. Gaston Motel. So they told me all about the Klan, and the kids in the neighborhood told me about them too, because they used to meet at the National Guard Armory near Legion Field, and we all knew to go home. Don't be down that way, just go home. Graymont Elementary School that's where my parents voted. They would always take us with them when they went to vote. And I would have all these questions about, well, where are the other black people? And every time we would have these questions, they would hush us up. We were standing in line. And honestly, I thought it was a lesson in civic responsibility. But as an adult, I asked my mom, and she said, the reason why we took you all is because they were less likely to be spat upon or assaulted or talked bad to with kids. I said, oh yeah, y'all were using us, huh? But in my mind, and the results of that, it indeed was a lesson in civic responsibility, because if my parents went through that in order to vote, it had to have been something that they felt needed to be done, and it was important. And so as a result, you can check my record. I don't ever miss. I voted consistently since I was 18 years old. I've encouraged other people to vote. If you believe it or not, I go to the barbershop. They spend most of the time on my beard, not my hair. But when I walk in there, I talk about voting. When I leave, I talk about voting. If they have questions, I try my best to answer the questions in there. And for a while, I used to maintain a kiosk with voter registration cards there, because I felt that was my responsibility, because I knew the importance of it, and I wanted to pass that on to other people. Probably the most difficult question I had was, why are there white churches and black churches? If the Bible is right, then they don't talk about 2 different or 3 different or 4 different churches based upon race. Show it to me. What about that little song, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight, Jesus loved them? Come on now, it's not happening. And we would pass church after church after church, and I wanted to know what was going on in the white churches that wasn't going on in 16th Street. I would ask questions like that. My parents made sure that they didn't instill upon us hate. And they tried their best to respond to us intelligently, but the more they responded, the more questions I had. When my mom and dad ran out, they would send us next door to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and she would try her best. She would talk about going to Clark Atlanta University, and she met her husband who's a Morehouse man in Atlanta, and she was from Waycross, Georgia, and all that. I said, I didn't ask about that, Nanny. I asked about, why are there different stuff for black folks and white folks? And why is it that the school buildings are different for white kids than black kids? And why we get school books with torn pages? And how come when you open up the school book, there are no images of black folks? You had Dick, Jane, Sally, Spot, and Puff, and that was it. No Dales, no Kens. That's what I was looking for. And when she ran out of things to say, she would always say, Dale, if you want to overcome this issue of race, you need to pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. That was her mantra. And she was consistent with it. I was impressed by it because I still remember it, and I'm 71 years old. Pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. So by them being all educators, I had a very good experience in school. By the time I was 12, I'd probably been on at least 6 or 7 college campuses, all HBCUs. And I knew that I was going to college when I was 12. And many of my peers, my friends, didn't have a clue as to what that meant. But again, I was blessed with parents that invested in education. One of the big deals at Parker High School was science fair. And I became interested in that. I thought that I would end up with a technical degree or some sort of science or medical, something. And so my parents, whatever it cost, they never told me that the project I chose to do was too expensive. They sacrificed to buy the parts or find them. Many times they would find people in the community, because the type of projects I worked on, there weren't very many black people that knew how to do the stuff that I was trying to do, thereby no help or no advice. We even talked to black kids who had been to the military. And they tried the best they could, but finally my mom talked to someone who knew some white guys, engineers over at Univac Computer. And for a while I had a little space in their workshop all by myself. And I would catch the bus over there and they would help me with my science projects. So all white people weren't bad. Now, had the wrong white folks found out about that, they probably would have put it to a stop or intimidated me or them or, whatever, both of us. I had never seen Dr. King in person. I admired him so, though. I went to Brunetta Hill School, and Dr. King's nephews, Al and Derek, who was the sons of A.D. King, King's brother, went there, and they told us about the movement directly from them. I remember being over to their house over in Inslee, and their mom asked us to settle down and quit making so much noise because their uncle was in the bedroom trying to get some rest. I said, wait a minute, Ms. King, you mean to tell me that Dr. Martin Luther King's on the other side of that door? She said, yes. I said, well, can he come out? And she said, huh? I said, well, can I open the door and just look at him? I just want to look at him. She said, no. I started to do it anyway, but you know what that would have meant had I done so. But I admired him so much. He was unlike any other man I'd ever seen, black or white. His intellectual depth and oratory genius, that's what I used to call it. He was different. I'd heard ministers from all over, but nothing like him. I thought it was something magical about Morehouse College because that's where he went as an undergraduate. He was just brilliant, and I wanted to be like him. Now, the real local guy in the civil rights movement was Fred Shuttlesworth. He attempted to integrate Phillips High School and do some things, the lunch counters and the buses and stuff like they did in Montgomery, and he failed every time. Or he didn't get a whole lot of participation from the citizens of Birmingham. So he felt that if he could convince Dr. King to come here, because King had gained quite a bit of notoriety in Montgomery with Rosa Parks and the bus boycott years earlier, and then he had done some stuff over in Macon, Georgia. So he had a national presence. After the jails filled in Birmingham and the kids got involved, because initially they used adults, two problems. If the adults got locked up, who was at home watching the kids? Problem number two, when the adults ever got out of jail and returned to their jobs, many times they didn't have a job. Oh yeah, we know where you've been, fooling with Shuttlesworth and King, and you don't work here anymore. Somebody came in who wanted to work rather than be out there demonstrating about stuff that they couldn't fix. And so that was the second problem. The story goes that when Dr. King finally decided to demonstrate himself, I think that he was locked up for 20 days, and that's where he did a letter from a Birmingham jail in response to some ministers, white ministers, who took out an ad in the Birmingham News and said, we understand, Dr. King, why you're here, but we want you to slow down. We're about to change forms of government, and we're thinking that with the council mayor form of government, some things will happen out of that, because they had some sort of commissioner form. But the worst part of that was you had Eugene Bull Connor, who was over police, fire, had even something to do with education. And then he was the go-between between white businessmen who wanted to keep their hands clean from that, and the Klan and the police, and Bull ran all of that. So they were in the process of changing the form of government here in Birmingham by an election, and they wanted Dr. King to slow down. But he ended up writing a response that became probably the most brilliant essays ever in Earth. And that was a letter from a Birmingham jail. And in essence, what it said was, we don't have time to wait. The Emancipation Proclamation was in, 1863? And here it is 100 years later, and we still ain't free. Brown versus Board of Education was 1954, 55. And that essentially outlawed segregation. But not a single school in the South had been integrated. And so he said, I can't wait, because wait in that context always means never. So that created this eloquent piece called A Letter from a Birmingham Jail, and that led to one of his books, Why We Can't Wait. While Dr. King was locked up, James Bevel, who was one of his lieutenants, youngster, had a lot of rapport with young people. He was closer to the age of the people. He did a campaign and invited kids to come in and got them involved in the movement. I don't think King liked that too much because Dr. King had babies. He had babies, and as a new father, he understood what that was. And he knew that if a kid got hurt or killed in the demonstrations, they would probably blame it on him. And he thought that the demonstrations was an adult situation, not a kid situation. I think at one point, Bull Connor said, if he locked up a kid and figured out who you were, your education for that year was threatened. As a matter of fact, for a couple of years, there were no senior proms. There was a group of people that came back here 5, 6 years ago and had their prom 50 years later because they were prohibited from having it during that time. It made national news. The essence of the demonstrations had to do with media coverage. If there were no journalists there, then nobody else would know about it. If dogs were biting the demonstrators and fire hoses, nobody would know. If NBC, CBS, and all of them were there. And so consequently, the guys and the ladies who came to cover those stories couldn't stay in the Holiday Inn or the Tutwiler or anywhere else, because if the Klan caught them, they'd tear their equipment up, because the Klan understood also that the whole world was seeing what was going on. And back then, the Klan and the police department were synonymous. The day of the bombing, my mother, again, was a school teacher, and the schools had been integrated September 4th, first day of school. And my mom normally would go to 16th Street Church, go to her Sunday school class that was upstairs in the main sanctuary in the choir loft. That's where they met. And the kids were downstairs. My brother was on one side of the lower auditorium with Miss Effie McCall. McCall School, as it was named for her. She was my grandmother's best friend. And she was, Ken was in her class. And I was in a class, all boys. We were 11, 12, 13, 14. It was one guy in there 14 years old. And it was Youth Day. And the thing was the love that forgives. And my mother dropped us off, went back home because her lesson plan was due, as was many of the teachers at 16th Street. And so they too dropped the kids off, went back home. My mom didn't worry about how we were gonna get home. We knew everybody there. My dad was up the street working at the A.G. Gaston Motel that incidentally had been bombed June 11th. They had just repaired it. And so if push came to shove, my dad could run us home and come back. So getting home was not a big issue to her. So we went to Sunday school. My class was over around 10:05, something like that. Mr. Greer, my Sunday school teacher, was a deacon, so he went upstairs to get ready for the 11 o'clock service. And the kids stayed in the basement, in the library where we met. We were there talking about boy stuff. It was the first of the school year, and we were all concerned about who was going to have the best football team. Would it be Parker or Ullman or Hayes? We talked about the band experience, who was going to have the best band. And one of us was in the 9th grade, and I think he was in Ullman's band, so we wanted to hear about that because all of us were budding musicians. We should have been upstairs getting ready to play in the church orchestra. We had a little time, so we were down there just talking about that. We were all excited about the football season more so than probably the education part of it. And there was a box of American flags that somebody had sent to church. And I guess they stored them in the library, and we found them. And we were in the process of passing them out to each other. I don't know why. I'm not sure what we were going to do with them. But all of a sudden, the building started to shake, and there was smoke, there was dust. Honestly, I can't tell you that I heard it, because the percussion was so loud that it went beyond. I just don't remember hearing it. I saw the results. It's as if this room was just devastated all of a sudden. There was a huge bookcase full of books, floor to ceilings, had a glass front, and the bookcase was reeling. It was not stable, but had it tipped over, it would kill somebody in that room, for sure. And we looked at each other without saying a word and took off running. We got out into the open area, and we ran. I remember running into people, some kids. I couldn't see. Smoke, dust, and the building was still shaking. And you could still hear rumbling. I did hear that, maybe some of the after effects. And I remember running into folding chairs, which is where you sat in that open space in the basement. And it was hurting on your shins, but if you run in full speed. And I ran to the stairwell that we used to get in there. I knew there was one identical on the other side where my brother's classroom was, but it was always locked, because I knew that. We knew that church like the back of our hands. And I attempted to run up the stairs, and a police officer was there. Now, the building was still shaking. If we called the police right now, it would take 7 minutes minimum to get here. But here, the building was still shaking, and there he was. And I tried to run past him. He said, "Nigga, get back down in there." And I kept going. Ran right under his arm as fast as I could. I got out on the outside of the church, and I was standing there, 6th Avenue, 16th Street, and it was an overcast day. It was an eerie calm. I could see pigeons flying from the top of the church where they were roosting up in the area. And then I smelled the pungent odor of gunpowder. I said, gosh, they have blown up the church with people in it. Who does that? What type of folk do that? I had not seen my brother at that point, and people were wandering all over, crying and stuff, looking for their siblings, their moms and dads. I noticed that adults were coming down from the main sanctuary, and some of them were being escorted, helped down, and some were bleeding. Some had shards of glass in their hands, and the older people were being assisted down those steps. And so I went back into the basement looking for my brother. And immediately I ran into a fireman. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm looking for my brother." Is that okay? He said, "Go ahead." Well, who lets an 11-year-old boy back into a building that had just been bombed? And you don't know whether there's a second bomb. You don't know whether, as a result of the first one, the building would collapse. But I went to his classroom because I wasn't thinking. My adrenaline kicked in, and I was the oldest of the two of us. I had to go find him. So I went to his classroom, and he wasn't there. I yelled for him. I looked all under the tables, and no one was in the room. The second time I left, I picked up my clarinet that was sitting there on the table. I thought about it then, and came out, continued to look for him. There was a big oak tree that was right in front of 16th Street Church that had grown up through the sidewalk. And we played around that tree all the time. That was our amusement space. And I saw Miss Effie McCall standing there with, looked like she was holding on to about 6 kids with just all together. One of them was Ken. So I made sure he was okay, hugged him. He was crying, a little upset, because he couldn't understand what had happened. And I tried my best to explain to him. Miss McCall knew. And because I was there, she decided that I should stay with her too. And I said, "Well, Miss McCall, you got your hands full. My dad is up the street at the motel. He'll be here in a minute. So we're good." And she didn't debate me. I thought she would, but she didn't. Because she was that type of person. "No, I told you to stay here." But we went to the corner and we stood there, and within a minute's time, we saw him running. I never saw my dad run like that. I'm talking about as fast as he could. And he was hightailing it down to the corner. When he got to the curb, a police officer stopped him, probably the same one that stopped me from trying to get it, and he told him, those are my boys, I need to check on them. He never waited for a response, kept going. And he got to us, he made sure we were okay. He asked us over and over again, are you all okay? No scratches, no bruises, any glass in your hat, anything. Whatever, he was examining us, and he took us down to his office, and we went through that process again. I think he made my brother take his shirt off. But I remember the journalist who was staying at the A.G. Gaston Motel, seemingly, it wasn't physical, but they were arguing over the payphones in the lobby, in that small lobby at the A.G. Gaston Motel, because they were trying to phone their stories back to wherever they had come from. And it were 2 payphones, phone booths, and they seemingly were arguing over them. But we ended up in his office that had just been imploded because of the bomb a few months prior, 4 months, I think. And he tried to call home, line was busy. And he was so frustrated. He kept saying, why is she on the phone? Well, people from all over the country were calling by then. And he called next door to my aunt and grandmother, same thing, line busy. He even called next door to our neighbors, the Bradfords, and I don't think he got an answer. But he kept calling and calling. Finally got my mom, and he said, look, the boys are safe. I have them, they're fine. And he didn't know what was going to happen in that area next, and so he said, you better come and get them. And I think they even debated whether or not he should come home too, but he had to work. And there were people staying in that motel he was responsible for, so he couldn't come home. But I think she just wanted to have him home. But anyway, her drive should have taken, in normal circumstances, 15 minutes. But I think it took about a half hour for her to get there. She pulled into that breezeway area, and she jumped out of that car almost before she got it in park good. And you could tell she had been crying. And she hugged us and got us into the car and tried to make our way back home, but demonstrations were going on all over that area. People were in the streets, the police were in the streets. You could tell something was about to happen. And she finally got us home. And my aunt and grandmother standing out in the front yard, because they lived next door, waiting on us, and we had to go through the same process of, yeah, we're fine, physically fine, but not mentally. We weren't old enough to know what that was, but we were a mess because it was frightening, it was terrifying. There had been bombs all over Birmingham. They bombed Arthur Shore's, Attorney Shore's house twice, and he lived basically 3 blocks from us. Every time they bombed his house, it would shake ours. But we knew what the rule was. Get on the floor, away from the windows, don't move until we tell you. Don't go outside, because there may be another bomb wrapped with shrapnel that was designed to maim and kill you. It was like being shot with 100 guns at one time. If it's wrapped with nails and bolts and pieces of steel and stuff. So we stayed in the house, and when the thing would happen close to the home, close to the house. So we had heard the bombs, but never had we ever been in a church or in a building where it occurred. My grandmother tried to talk to us once again about why bad things happen to good people. And why is it that they blew up God's house? We thought that, well, we were taught that God's house, the church, was a place of refuge, place of protection. And obviously we almost or could have lost our lives in the church. A few hours later, we found out that 27 people were admitted to the hospital, and 4 of them were deceased. And the names of the 4, there were rumors going back and forth, and they didn't get it right at first because we heard all these different stories. And finally, we learned that 4 precious girls, Addie Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, all our friends, 4 precious girls lost their lives Sarah Collins was there too. There were 5 girls in the ladies' room, and she lost the sight of one eye. I saw her yesterday at the service at 16th Street Church, and we took a photograph together. The police found their house, again, not too far from me, and the police asked them, which one of you all are the oldest? And Junior raised her hand, and the cop said, come on, go with me. Didn't even bother to say, well, where's your mom? She got in the police car, and then they took her to the University of Alabama Medical Center and took them to a makeshift morgue, pulled the sheet back and said, that's your sister. And she collapsed. She had no idea. And then pretty soon she found out that her mother was in another room in the same hospital with Sarah, who had lost sight in one eye. And she stayed in the hospital for months because the medical science had not advanced to the point to where they could perhaps save her eyesight. And I think the state and this country owes her something. Carol and Cynthia played clarinet in the orchestra. I'm not sure what was going on because they were preparing to put on robes to sing in the choir. Now again, it was youth day, and perhaps Carol and Cynthia were taking a break from the orchestra to go sing in the choir. That may be what was going on. The bum was on the other side of the wall from where they were, and it was a huge stairwell, and I think they hid it under the hollow space under those stairs. The explosion blew that whole stair away. They never put it back because we didn't use it anyway because it was too steep. I think that was a flaw in the architecture. Somebody put it there. It was a good idea. It was a good escape route if there was a fire or something, but nobody ever used it because I think people thought somebody would fall down the steps, trip, and you got to fall down 20 more steps to get your footing. We never used it, and so when the bombing destroyed it, they never put it back. Later that day, 2 black boys were killed. The police shot one for throwing rocks, and the other one was shot by a white Eagle Scout who just had target practice. Neither one of them were ever prosecuted. The following week was spent trying to give Ken and I some sort of comfort because we weren't right. And there was no mental health places for boys and girls to go to that had just experienced that. Again, my grandmama tried her best to explain why that happened. She tried to assure us that it wouldn't happen again. And we wanted to know why. How do you know? Because we began to question just how safe is the church. We even asked her, she even told us that if we ever get in trouble, you can always go to the church. Well, what about a white church? When we went there, could we get help there? She said, probably so. I said, well, if they helped, why is it that we can't go to church there on Sunday? She couldn't answer that. Because again, they tried their best not to talk about hate. And they minimized their responses because they didn't want us to feel inferior because of our skin color. But this day, she again said, pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. But she added something to it. She said, boys, God spared you for a reason. Could have been 4 little boys versus 4 little girls. You need to make up in your mind that you're going to do something for somebody else. I call it the human condition. Addie, Denise, Cynthia, and Carol want to have a chance to do that. You have to do your part and their part as well. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I never forgot it. School was business as usual, no mental health. We were expected to sit there and go through our schoolwork as if nothing was wrong. If a book fell on the floor, it would frighten me. I don't tell everybody this. I just started talking about this part. I was a little embarrassed. The Shriners had a circus at Legion Field every summer. And we couldn't go to the circus. But the little kids in the neighborhood, we would wander down there and walk around Legion Field and see the elephants and the tigers and stuff who were stored under the stands, and we could see them. You could hear them, the roars and stuff. And to us, that was a thrill in and of itself. But we couldn't go to see the performance. But what we could do was, they had a brilliant fireworks display every night of that circus. And it was so close. I mean, we lived 2 blocks from Legion Field, and looked like the sparkles would land in our yard. We were so close. And we would go next door to the Bradford house, and there they had some nieces, pretty little girls that visited every summer. Their dad was a military man. They lived in West Virginia, but they would visit every summer. So we'd go over there and share. The porch was bigger than ours, and we sit on the steps and watch the fireworks and, boom, woo. And we had done that quite a bit, but right after the bombing, the following year after the bombing, I couldn't do it. When the first one went off, I had to go. And I went home next door, pretending like I had to do something, go to the bathroom, do something. And I didn't want the little girls to see me upset or afraid, because that's what I was. I was afraid. It was too close. And I was studying the percussion, and this went on for a long time, until one of them asked me, "Why do you keep going home? Don't you want to stay out here?" And I just didn't know how to answer them. Denise was closer to my age. I was 11, she was 12. I kind of had my eye on her. I'm not sure why, because I was 11, but it was something about her that I liked. Her mother could sing like a bird. Her mother was in the choir, and I always loved it when she had solo parts, because she was the real deal when it came to her soprano voice. And even as a young person, at that point, having a love for music, I recognized her talent and appreciated it. Carol, I know her mother and my mother grew up together, and we were in Jack and Jill together. And she was a little ahead of me, so I don't think we were in the same group, but she loved to read. Her mother was a librarian. Her dad was a music teacher, played trumpet. And she was a Girl Scout, because I remember her mom talking about her sash with all of her little awards and little things that Girl Scouts get. Addie, she didn't live too far from us, and there was a bunch of girls she had a bunch of siblings, and every now and then we would see them walking to church. And my mom would do the best she could to get them all in the car. She'd come back and get them and bring them. But when we saw them, we would give them a ride to church. Always fun-loving, sweet kids. None of them participated in the demonstrations, like myself. Cynthia, I think Cynthia was adopted by the Wesleys. Their dad was a school principal. The mother, Gertrude, was a school teacher. Yeah, she was. She was, because I remember her biological family got involved with her life after she was dead by then, but they came on the scene. I guess they wanted to be recognized that Cynthia was actually their sibling, and because the Wesleys adopted her, okay? The Wesleys were childless, because everybody else had multiple kids, well, except the McNairs. They eventually had kids. They were the youngest couple, and they had 2 daughters. But Mrs. Wesley had a student named Shirley. She became Shirley Wesley. I forget her real name, but she went to Miss Wesley and told her, after she noticed how how Mrs. Wesley was processing the death of her daughter and still was at school trying to teach other kids. She went to Miss Wesley and said, you know what, I'll be your daughter. And the Wesleys adopted her. Now, I don't know what adopting black kids meant then, but Shirley became their daughter, and she adopted their last name, and she lives in Dallas. We used to keep up with each other, but I haven't seen her in a while, but she's in Dallas. I'm sure she's still there. And they took very good care of her. She ended up going to Spelman in grad school. She's Dr. Shirley King. And, but Cynthia was, I think she was probably received the worst part of the bummer because she was decapitated partially. And imagine that. What an awful way to lose your life. Carol's funeral was Tuesday at St. John AME Church around the corner from 16th Street Church. And Denise, Addie, and Cynthia's funeral was at 6th Avenue Baptist Church over on the south side. And the story goes that Dr. King wanted to have a mass funeral of all four girls, but by the time he reached the Robertson house, Mrs. Robertson informed him that they had already made the arrangements and they were going to stick to that. And there are different theories about why she couldn't cancel her plan and go along with the program, but that was her daughter. And she wanted that time, that space in time to be dedicated to her. Not that she was being selfish, but that was her baby. I may have done the same thing if I was in her shoes, who knows. But her funeral was Tuesday, and the other three was Wednesday. My mother went to the funeral home to view several of them. She wouldn't let us go. And she told us that they looked like girls, but not themselves. I'm not sure I wanted to see that. And at that point in my life, I didn't know too much about funerals anyway. I had been to a funeral of Reverend Luke Beard, who was the minister that I can remember at 16th Street Church, but he was an older man. You're talking about my peers, little girls, and well, they were little girls to me. We were about the same age. Most of them were slightly older, but she wouldn't let us go to the funeral home to view them. And we went and took groceries, supplies, and stuff to the families. We prayed with them. We tried the best we could to comfort them because, again, these weren't casual acquaintances. I don't know how I got there Wednesday. Obviously, I left school, Hill School, and somehow made my way over to 6th Avenue Baptist Church. And that was quite a distance, so I know I didn't walk. I remember attempting to get into the church because I knew Dr. King was delivering the eulogy. And I was interested in hearing him and seeing him in person. But the church was filled to capacity and the fireman wouldn't let me in. So I listened to Dr. King's eulogy from the outside, that melodious voice. And I stood there and I saw the recessional begin, and he was leading the recessional, and he exited the church with his robe on, and he was followed by Reverend Abernathy and Shuttlesworth and Reverend Cross and Reverend Ware at 6th Avenue. But there he was out front. And then the pallbearers brought 3 coffins out and loaded them into the hearse that was nearby. Dr. King was standing there as if he was guarding that process. And he was no more than 10 feet away from me. The most powerful moment in my life. I've been to the White House. I've shared the podium with the President of the United States because of my civic stuff and big brothers, big sisters, and that was good. But nothing to compare with just standing there looking at Dr. King. It was so powerful that I attempted to look away. I was 11 years old. I could not process that because I admired the man so, but this was a difficult moment for him, and I knew it. perhaps you would say that 11-year-old shouldn't know anything about that, but you could see the look on his face. And those caskets being lowered into the hearse were to transport them to their final resting place. Final, never to come back again, never to see them again, was real to me at that point. And I shared whatever was on his mind because he had a weird look on his face. But whatever he was thinking, I agreed with him. I didn't feel real good about that. And I went home devastated by having to say goodbye to my friends. I didn't know which was in which, but I had to say goodbye to all of them. And again, asking questions of my parents that really couldn't answer them. They couldn't answer them. What type of people do stuff like this? I wanted to demonstrate, but my parents didn't want us to get locked up, and I always felt guilty about that. Even after the bombing, I felt like I wanted to play a role because I was angry then. Wasn't too much my grandmother could tell me at that point to prevent that, because those girls were dead, never to come back. As a matter of fact, we met at the L.R. Hall Auditorium, which was right across the street from the A.G. Gaston Motel. That building was owned by Dr. Gaston, and we met in that auditorium for a year and a half until they built the church back. And the first Sunday, my mother, my brother, and I went to church, and because my dad went to a Methodist church on the other side of town. And the following Sunday, after sitting in church, and again remembering the scene of the caskets being loaded into the hearse and the finality of death, and I knew that death could come on a kid just like an older person. And I used to ask my grandmama all the time, at what has to happen? Where do you have to, what's the process for making the decision to join church and giving your life to God? And she said, you'll know it when time comes. And I thought that was the time. So I went up and joined, because I'm thinking, I didn't know what the world had in store next. Would I be the next victim? And I wanted to be ready for my eternal life, so to speak. I grew up a lot then. And so I joined, and when the church was repaired and we were back in the church, I was in the first group of kids to be baptized. So I remember that quite well. It was about 12 of us. And perhaps the 11 others were thinking the same thing I was thinking, because life became real. Having to be in a devastating experience like that at such a young age with no mental health resources. But there was Sunday school, there was 16th Street Church, there was my grandmother, and there were other grandmothers, there was the extended family, the village, that did their very best to come. There was my mom and dad. I know kids who have never recovered fully, mentally, from that. I'm not a psychologist, but some of them aren't right yet, and that's been 60 years. I just hope no other kids have to go through that. Every time there's a mass shooting at a school especially, I'm reminded of that experience and how devastating that has to be to parents and siblings and relatives and friends of kids whose lives get snuffed out because of silly stuff. I wonder about our elected officials who continue to promote the proliferation of guns and gun violence, and it's not going to stop till they get them off the street. And it's too late to say, well, he was arrested because of mental problems, but he still had the gun, and crazy stuff like that. I'm not the smartest man on earth, but I'm that smart to know that they've got to get rid of the gun violence. The system even took its time about indicting and prosecuting the 4 that finally were accused bombers. And I don't think they got all of them. In both instances, the guys who prosecuted them, they were doing it for political purposes. I like Doug Jones. I like him. I saw him Sunday, took a photograph with him. But he knew, just like Baxter knew, that if he solved that he would get the black vote. As a matter of fact, he was joking about it Sunday about getting a black female vote to get elected. So I'm not saying he did it selfishly, but it was something that needed to be done, and just to have closure. I drove from Dallas to Birmingham to the Blanton trial. I was not subpoenaed to come here, but I wanted to sit through the trial to see some sort of closure. I wanted to see what that process was like. I wanted to hear from him if he testified, because I needed to understand what makes you do that kind of stuff that offers that type of hatred. He didn't testify himself, but I was sitting in the room when they found him guilty. And I didn't see too many of my peers who I knew were at that church. Miss Robertson was there. And I went to her and spoke to her and told her who I was. It's been years since she'd seen me, you know, because some people never set foot in that church again. And of course, all of the parents are deceased now. The Wesleys, the Collinses, the Robertsons, and the McNairs now. Every opportunity that I get to do what I'm doing now, I do it because the story needs to be told, it needs to be preserved, and maybe people won't resort to hate, the type of hate that would make you want to do something like that. I don't think anything could be going on in my life that would cause me to even think about something like that. And it lets you know the degree of hatred that exists back then, and in some cases it's still around. And I'm counting on people we elect to do the jobs. So now I travel the country telling the same story that I just told you all about my experience in Birmingham. And here recently, let's see, I've been to the University of Wyoming, and I went to SMU, and I was supposed to go to Oklahoma State University Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, but they phoned and canceled it, and I think it has something to do with the critical race thing. And I think that's what's going on, because it didn't make sense to me. They said it was having money problems. Well, whatever's going to cost them to get me there ain't that much for Oklahoma State University. But they promised to keep me in mind for later. And I talked to a buddy of mine, the guy who brought me up to Wyoming, and he says, man, all universities are scrambling, trying to continue the type of programming that would get me to a school like that without calling it. They got to rename something, hide it, because you know the auditors are watching from these state governments that say we mean it, cut it out. And the story I just told you is basically illegal to talk about in schools. Imagine that. They don't want to know about it. So people who don't remember the history are doomed to repeat it. One of the last little brothers I had, Montel, that was his name. We were on our way to the Cowboys game, and we thought he'd be just overwhelmed with that. It was on a Sunday. Ellen and I skipped church, and it was the three of us were going. And we picked him up in Mesquite. We were headed out I-30, and he said to us, "Have you heard about Trayvon Martin?" That was a little boy in Florida that the vigilante shot him over some. He was walking through the neighborhood with tea and Skittles. I think his stepdad lived in that neighborhood, and he was just visiting his stepdad. And this vigilante thought he was up to no good and shot him, got away with it. And Montel asked me, do you think that could happen to me? Now I know how my grandmother, my mom and dad felt, because the answer is yes, but you don't want to say that to him. So we talked about why bad things happen to good people. We talked about pulling your pants up, not being a stereotypical hanging pants, even though people say, let them do it. That's what they want to do. They ain't hurting nothing. They ain't hurting you. The hoodies. But more importantly, I told them about making sure somebody knows where he is all the time. And if you find yourself in a situation where you think something isn't right, get yourself out of that situation as fast as you can. Exiting the church when the bomb went off. And then we went on to talk about another incident that took place in Texas in a little town called Bog Springs. The police went to this house where a party was going on. They just knew it was drugs because it was loud, and a lot of kids. And they went to the house, and eventually they said there was no drugs, no underage drinking, none of that. Just kids having fun. And when the police got there, the kids started scattering. And one kid got in his car and got his buddies in the car and attempted to back out. And according to the police, he was trying to run them over, but these kids were trying to go. And the cops shot in the car, killed the driver, shot him in the head. And I think he was convicted for that. And that had just happened. And we talked about that, and I talked about hanging out with your friends. You may not need to follow the gang, not gang, but your friends sometimes. Sometimes you might have to remove yourself, especially if you're leaving the agenda for the evening up to somebody else. You don't know where you're going. You don't know whose house you're going to. You don't know what neighborhood you're going to. And again, it's no way to fully protect a teenage kid from something like that. But I told him, if you find yourself, even if you have to walk away, keep a few quarters with you. Do people still have pay phones? I don't see them. But he has a fake pay phone, a cell phone. And I said, call me, man, I'll come and get you. Even if I'm doing something else, I'll stop what I'm doing, I'll come and get you home, keep you safe. But he kept on asking questions because that didn't satisfy him. And I found his question asking the same position I found myself in asking my parents now 60 years ago about some of the same type of questions, but in a different context. And then it caught me. I said, Montel, if you want to deal with the things that are happening to kids your age because of gun violence and things like that, you need to pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. That's my solution, ultimately. There's some other things you can do, but don't forget that. Because when I learned about it 60 years ago, it worked for me. It worked for you too.